Okay, well, it's 4 o'clock, so while people are logging in, we can just start up. Hishjay, Lara Jacobs, Johojifkidos, Muskogee Muddyes. Hi, everyone. My name is Lara Jacobs. I'm a citizen of the Muskogee Creek Nation and a PhD student in the College of Forestry. I'm also the president of Oregon State University's chapter of the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, and I'd like to welcome you to our third event in the Indigenizing Science Speaker Series. This afternoon, we'll be focusing on indigenizing academia. Before I introduce our guests, I'm going to turn this over to one of our chapter advisors, Andrew Martinez, to facilitate a land acknowledgement.
All right, thank you. So I'll read the land acknowledgement here. We understand that the strength and persistence of every community originated from generations of people who gave their hopes and dreams to create a history that led us to where we are right now, to this culture of place, or this place of culture. Some of those people lived here for millennia, while others have arrived here to chase their dreams or were even brought here against their will. As we strive to create an atmosphere of respect and connections across all the differences, we understand the importance of truth and acknowledgement. We honor the truth about these lands where Oregon State University sits today. The following land acknowledgement was created by members of local tribes for those to use at our university. Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon is located within the traditional homelands of the Marys River or Apafinu Band of Kalapuya. Following the Willamette Treaty of 1855, Kalapuya Treaty, Kalapuya people were forcibly removed to reservations in Western Oregon. Today, living descendants of these people are part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde community and the Confederate Tribes of Siletz Indians.
Great, thank you so much, Drew. And so we're going to start off the event with some questions for our guest speakers that we put together, or that were put together by our ACES chapter members. And then we're going to open things up for a community discussion towards the end. So if you have any questions for our speakers today, please just put those in the Q&A box on your screen, and we'll try to get to those during the discussion portion of our event. Today, it's my honor to introduce two really incredible Indigenous academics, Dr. Twyla Baker, who is president of the Nueta Hidatsa Sanish College, and Dr. Kat Milligan-Myhre, who is an assistant professor of molecular and cell biology and microbiology at the University of Connecticut. So the first question from our ACES chapter today is, can you tell us a little bit about your educational and professional backgrounds and what led you to a career path in academia? And Dr. Baker, would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, first of all, good evening. It's evening here in North Dakota. Hello and welcome everybody. It's always wonderful to be able to spend some time with students and to interact, even though we're interacting virtually. This is still like my bread and butter. This is what I love to do. Talk to students and to sit and listen to you as well. The question itself was, can you tell us about your educational professional background? Well, I got my start when I left the reservation. I was born and raised on Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. I'm a citizen of the MHA Nation. And I left here with the idea that I wanted to be in science. So I wasn't quite sure what field of science. I knew I wanted to be in environmental science. And I ended up getting a degree, a bachelor's degree in environmental geology and technology, and a master's degree in education, and then a PhD in research methodology. So my path was a little circuitous, but I kind of ended up here in academia almost by accident. And it was never my intention or like my goal to necessarily be the president of our tribal college. Although I love what I do, I am so incredibly blessed to be able to be the president of Nueta Hidatsa Sanish College and to get to do what it is that I do. And that's basically, I tell people that I manufacture hope on behalf of my people. And that hope, of course, is our students. That's our people. It's the people that we send into the workforce. It's the people that are revitalizing our languages, that are preserving our traditional ecological knowledge, that are, making headway in industry, in all different types of fields and stuff. So I kind of, I wanted to just be out in the field with my rocks. And I ended up being here where I'm talking to, emerging scholars and people, future leadership, and helping them along the path towards who they're going to become. So I really got lucky in that sense. I came back here in 2013, back here being Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, where I was born and raised. And I was recruited home after I got my PhD. Literally, I think she waited like 2 weeks after I got my degree conferred. And then she was like, you know what, it's time to come home. You've been out there for 10 years now, and it's time to come home. And they brought me back and made me Dean of Students when I first got here. And then 2 weeks later, I was the Vice President of Student Services. And so it was really kind of a meteoric rise, not always necessarily with my with my understanding of what was going on or anything like that, but I'm a very spiritual person, and I really feel like Creator put me on a path. And basically the opportunities that presented themselves, it was really just a question of whether I was willing to take it up. And that's kind of how leadership finds you in Indian country. It's never gonna come when you're ready. It's more a question of, are you willing? And so I was lucky in that sense, because like I said, I get to, one of my most, proud moments was when I was, and this sounds so crazy, but I was signing a PO on horseback. And we have an equine studies program here at the tribal college, the only equine studies program at a tribal college in the United States. And I actually have my horse out there. So my horse is teaching people even, it's just crazy, just the stuff that I get to do. And in addition to the stuff that I have to do, and I don't mind any of that part. It's just a blessing, and I'm grateful to be on this trajectory, and grateful to spend time.
Awesome, thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. Milligan-Myhre, would you like to go next with the same question?
I'm Dr. Kat Milligan-Myhre. Inupak Miaruna, Napaktok Miaruna, Kikiktakrok Miaruna. I'm Inupak from the Napaktok tribe, and I grew up in Kikiktakrok, which is now called Kotzebue, Alaska, in Northwest Alaska. I start with that because, one, I want my ancestors to know that I'm speaking, but two, it's important to know that I came from Kotzebue, Alaska, in a rural town of 3,000 people. It was only 1,800 when I was growing up, but now it's about 3,200, mostly Alaska Native, and went from there to an Ivy League college, Cornell University, for a year, where I was going to study hotel management. The reason for that is because people who were successful in our region at the time, in the late 80s, early 90s, worked in tourism. And so I was going to run the local hotel and increase tourism in Kotzebue, and that was my goal. Ended up really not liking hotel administration. So the reason I didn't go into science originally, even though now I'm a microbiologist, is because I didn't realize that research is the thing that you could do. I went to school, I went to community college for a while to raise my GPA up, and then attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And the degree that I sought was medical microbiology and immunology. The reason for that is because I thought I was going to go into med school, and that's what all the pre-meds were doing. I was working as a nursing assistant to raise funds to be able to stay in school, and my grades slipped because I was working up to 30 some odd hours on the weekends and then going to school full time. So I decided to work in a research lab to beef my CV for medical school, and loved it. I loved the smell of agar. I liked working with people who were learning new things every day. I liked coming into lab and discovering that I was the first person who had made this plasmid, or who had discovered that this is how this microbe works. I love watching microbes under the microscope. I just think it's fascinating to watch life remerge, or emerge right in front of you. So I decided to stay in research. I was a lab tech for 3 years in a microbiology lab, and then decided that if I was going to be taken seriously in research, I needed to have a PhD. So I went back to school for my PhD, also in Madison, and earned a degree in microbiology, this time switching to parasites. And the reason I did that is because I felt like I was getting pigeonholed into one form of research, and I wanted to broaden the types of research that I could do. When I did my postdoc, I went into, I switched from studying microbes that can cause disease to studying microbes that can help us. One of the reasons I did that is because when I would tell the people back home what I was working on, they were like, what is this parasite that you're studying? This has nothing to do with me. How is this helping people back home? And I thought by studying beneficial microbes, these are microbes that when they're disrupted, when these communities of microbes are disrupted, they can lead, or they're correlated with obesity and diabetes and other things that affect people back home. So I thought if I could study these beneficial microbial communities, I could actually contribute to something that would help people back home. As a faculty member at the University of Alaska Anchorage, I focused on how populations differ in their microbial communities. And that's what I'm continuing at the University of Connecticut now. Unlike Twyla, or Dr. Baker, I don't get to work with students in the recruiting and retainment and helping them find their place on campus. I think that's amazing. I run a research lab, and I'm just getting it up and started at UConn. So yeah, that's my journey. It's not straight. It's all over the place.
It's an amazing journey, it sounds like. So Dr. Milligan-Myhre, what inspires you the most in your current work?
So right now I'm restarting my research lab. And so what that means is I'm trying to think of the directions that I'm going to take my research. And one of the things that I find most exciting is thinking about what my students are going to enjoy. I've had a lot of students. I've mentored about 40 students so far in the research lab or as a career mentor. And I just love thinking about these different questions that my students are going to be able to answer. One of the things that really excites me right now is diversifying STEM and thinking about how I can make the research lab more inclusive. As a part of that, I work really closely with the Native community on campus to figure out how to build ties with our tribal members and how to increase the number of Native students that we have on campus and specifically in research labs.
That's awesome. Dr. Baker, what inspires you most about your current work?
Oh my goodness, I draw inspiration from all kinds of different sources every single day. Of course, not necessarily right now because we're not in the building, but getting to walk around on my campus and seeing my tribal members and other people because we are a public institution of higher education. Seeing these young people and community members coming on campus and talking about, getting excited about what it is that they're doing, their academic journey and where they want to go and what they want to do with that stuff. That absolutely kind of gets me excited and it re-energizes me. I remember talking to a friend of mine who had not been back to school for decades. And he said, I'm back in school. We were just having this chat about I'm back in school and I'm so excited. And he was like, I'm so excited. I even got excited about buying my pencils and stuff, you know. So it's like that stuff is really fortifying. And I remember that stuff and I keep it kind of in my pocket for when things get difficult. And my culture, my history, the stuff that we're teaching, the fact that it's very, very centered upon the Indigenous worldview, that's really inspiring for as far as the work that I do, because a lot of it is really difficult. I mean, it's tough and it's grueling and it can be hard, you know, hitting the street in DC and going and talking to our congressional delegation about the fact that tribal colleges are the least funded, youngest institutions of higher education in the United States for its oldest citizens, for its oldest population, the ones that have been here the longest. And our knowledge bodies are older than everyone's on this continent. So we have this intimate relationship with the land, and I want to propagate that. I want to make sure that people know that, and I want to revitalize that knowledge. And, you know, honestly, it's about not just what my people need and serving that purpose, that absolutely inspires me, definitely. But it's also about what we have to teach the rest of the world. These mainstream institutions, what we have to teach them about how our people learn, what they want to learn, how our people and what they need in our communities, and how we can serve each other. Because I don't want anybody to take it for granted, the fact that Indigenous people have so much to teach the rest of the world. It's not always about, well, what is it, this need or this, lack in Indian communities. It's not about that. It's about what we have to teach them. And we have a lot to teach them. I mean, thinking about the pandemic that we're in right now, what populations have experienced this before? Us. So we have a lot to share, and we have a lot of knowledge to give to people about how to take care of each other, how to be good relatives, how to be good ancestors. So that's what inspires me. It puts the fire in my belly and really helps me to stay on track.
Awesome. So, and this question it's very integrated. I already see this with everything you're doing, but how do you integrate your cultural roots into your academic work?
It's relatively simple because my board actually tasks me with that. It's a unique part of being in the tribal college and university system. The fact that our culture, our language, our lifeways is often built into our mission. And so it's basically a part of my job description to do what it is that I'm talking about today. It's what we're here for. It's the whole reason I believe that tribal colleges came into existence in the first place. There was, if you think about it, our predecessors, the people that came before who created the tribal college movement in the 50s and 60s, they went to these PWIs or primarily white institutions, and they realized that what they were teaching, the way they were teaching it was not serving them as a people. It was not, basically feeding their identity. It was more or less blocking their identity. Which is pretty typical of, the standard Western education system. Therefore, a bunch of 20-year-olds, a bunch of 30-year-olds decided, no, we're going to do this ourselves. We're going to do this ourselves for our people. And I'm so blessed and so honored for the fact that they stood up and did that, because now we've got a couple generations now under our belt of people that have been educated through the TCU system. And we are one of the biggest providers of Native transfer students to PWIs or to mainstream institutions. And our students actually do better. We've done studies on this. They do better once they hit a larger institution because they've had that tribal college experience. They've had that understanding and that scaffolding to get to be successful in academic settings. So that's really using our strengths, our culture, to help our people to succeed and to adapt, which is what we've been doing for millennia.
Definitely. And thank you too for just kind of a historic overview of tribal colleges too. I know maybe many of our viewers don't have that history or don't know about it, so I appreciate you offering that. Dr. Milligan-Myhre, how do you integrate your cultural roots into your academic work?
So I went to primarily white institutions for all of my undergrad experiences, my PhD, my postdoc, and it wasn't until I went to the University of Alaska Anchorage, which has 10% of our students were Alaska Native and 8% of our faculty were Alaska Native, which is like unheard of, right? It wasn't until then that I really fully embraced my Indigenous self. Before then, I would keep my Indigenous self over here in a little bucket, and I would keep my scientist self over here in a different little bucket, and they almost never mixed, right? Maybe I would teach some workshops on Indigenous games or introduce, I'd say a D at work and be like, whoa, that's mind-blowing, nobody speaks Inupiaq here. But it wasn't until I got to UAA when I really realized that I could have both of these meshed together. I could be Indigenous at work. I could wear my Uttukluks. I could sprinkle in all the Inupiaq words that I want. I could bring my worldview into this system, and I can talk openly about the fact that you don't live for 10,000 years in the world's harshest climate without being scientists and without having some sort of way to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. We were academics, we were scientists because, and I know that because we survived for so long in this really harsh environment. So I bring that to my work now. Now I wear my Etoklooks. I don't worry about only dressing in Western clothes. I wear my indigenous earrings with the fur. I don't worry about people giving me a hard time about it. I have my tattoos on my hands now, which I didn't want to get before because I didn't think that that was a work appropriate. But now I recognize, look, this is a part of me. This is something that brings me closer to my ancestors, that helps me realize, that helps me recognize, and helps remind me that we have been scientists and that we belong in this academic world. The other thing that I bring is my worldview. So when I was a graduate student, I had a lot of friends who worked on this one specific gene that was involved in this one metabolic pathway, in this one specific microbe, in this one particular condition, and that's what they focused on. My research system is really wide. I study the microbial communities and how they interact with the host and genetic background of these different hosts in this ecosystem. And I take in consideration the evolution of these hosts in different bodies of water, and I take into consideration human influence and different nitrate levels and temperature ranges, and like all of this, I bring all of this and try to bring these into all of these big concepts to my study system. And I think that's how I bring my indigenous self in the research lab, not just by bringing my indigenous self there, but also bringing that concept, that way of looking at a biological system.
Very interesting. I know there's some scholars that kind of refer to that as two-eyed seeing, right? Where you're looking through one lens with your indigeneity and then the other lens through your Western science base. So yeah, that's awesome to hear about. Dr. Milligan-Myhre, what types of obstacles have you overcome to be where you are today? And what roles, if any, have Indigenous communities and Indigenous academics played in your successes?
Yeah, the biggest thing I've overcome is ignorance on behalf of other people. And so one of the things that I recognized early is that people are first going to see me as an Indigenous woman, and then they might see me as a researcher. But that Indigenous person is always going to be at the forefront because it's really hard to hide that I'm an Indigenous person. I don't want to hide that anymore, right? So the biggest obstacle for me has just been overcoming that initial stereotype that people are going to hold. And the reason I say stereotype and biases in there too, and all the fun things that go along with meeting somebody who's Indigenous for the first time. I've had to overcome people's expectation that I'm not going to be able to speak eloquently, or that I'm not going to be able to grasp really difficult concepts, because there's this idea that we don't have the mental capacity to understand complex model systems, for example. So I think that's been one of the biggest obstacles. And there have also been a lot of microaggressions that have gone along with that. I've had friends who've had beer bottles thrown at their heads. I've been chased out of a bar. I've been, like all the things that come along with being Indigenous in a primarily white world. Yeah, those are the obstacles that I faced.
Wow.
I'm going to turn off my video for a minute so I can close the door so my dog doesn't come back in.
Dr. Baker, so the same question for you. What types of obstacles have you overcome to be where you're at today, and what roles, if any, have Indigenous communities and Indigenous academics played in your successes?
Oh gosh. Well, some of the obstacles that I'm thinking of, a lot of them were personal in nature. I did all of this while I was having 7 children. I have a big family. I have a really big family, and it's a very traditional thing. And honestly, it's like trying to manage all that. And then of course, money is always I come from I didn't even realize how poverty stricken I was as a child growing up until I left the reservation. I think because I had a tendency to kind of measure, you don't realize that you're missing things if you don't really, if it was never there to begin with, or if you measure if your currency isn't necessarily in the form of dollar bills. Of course, we did suffer because of the fact that we didn't have a whole lot of monetary wealth, but I had a enormous wealth of cultural knowledge, and the fact that I had two parents who were their first language was Hirasa, and they had just this wealth of cultural and and identity knowledge that they shared with me, and that I took when I left here. And I think reconciling that side of myself with this finding where my place was in academia, that was quite a challenge, And I'm to the point in my career where I reject the notion of walking in two worlds. I reject it outright because I am an Indigenous woman wherever I go. I've got this other world that we always want to talk about. I've got all their letters. I'm an expert in by their measure. Therefore, I speak with an authority within that system, but the authority that is bestowed upon me by my people is a function of my knowledge of my identity, my clan kinship system, my mother and father, who I am related to, and my knowledge of all that. So that was really hard one too. So I really protect that. I really, really protect that, and I value it, perhaps even more than the letters that are behind my name, because that's what gives me credibility and validity within my community. And that's the reason why they look to me to be, within this leadership capacity. So reconciling that was definitely a challenge. I think I had the standard challenges as well, being in a STEM field, female, Native, a brown woman of color. And really the other thing I can think of is in terms of struggling with imposter syndrome, just like what Dr. Milligan-Myhre was talking about, struggling with that imposter syndrome, or thinking, having this, and imposter syndrome is a function of colonization, telling us that we are not authorities within our own world, which is just ridiculous if you think about it. But it's like we kind of internalize that sometimes, and then pushing back against that and remembering who I am, remembering where I come from, who I speak for, and the fact that they have given me permission to speak. That is how I fight imposter syndrome. And I find, I always kind of look at some of the mainstream systems and I think, if that guy can be president, I'm trying not to be too terribly political. Hey, I'm here too. I can do what I need to do, and I can speak on behalf of my people and to help them out as much as I can. So.
Awesome. So this is a big question and a very important question, especially with our topic today. So Indigenous academics consist of one of the smallest percentages of faculty across U.S. degree granting institutions. As of 2018, they account for less than 0.5% of all faculty nationwide. So what is needed at the institutional level to increase Indigenous representation in academia? Or in other words, how do we indigenize academia? And either one of you can start. Whoever wants to chime in first.
I recognize that direction. Okay. Yeah, so I realized that as Dr. Baker was speaking, that I completely forgot the second part of that. And I think it really ties into how we can indigenize education and increase the number of Native faculty on campuses. I didn't think that there was a place for me here. I thought that I had to assimilate to be able to be a researcher on a campus. I think one of the ways that we can improve, increase the number of faculty and students who are on our campuses is to really let them know that this is a place for them, and recognizing and telling them that we are scientists, we are researchers, we are academics. We've been studying life for 10,000, 20,000 generations. We've been We've been the leading academics. We've been, you think about what academia is. It's passing knowledge on from one generation to the next. We've done that, and we've done that to the extreme. We've been able to hold on to our traditions through 400 years of forced assimilation. Like, how do you become more academic than being able to transfer knowledge from one generation to the next in the face of these incredible obstacles that we've dealt with? So that's how I've been able to maintain here. That's how I've been able to, that's how I have overcome imposter syndrome. That's how I've been able to find my place on campuses. It's just recognizing that I deserve a place here. I earned the place. I wasn't given a degree, I earned that degree. The second thing I think we really need to do is we need to make an overhaul of the structure from the top to the bottom. We need to increase the number of students we have, the number of Native faculty we have, the number of Native staff we have, the number of Native administrators, because we can't just be voices that are just faculty speaking to students or just staff speaking to faculty or et cetera. We need to have we need to have Indigenous administrators who are making top level decisions, not just a figurehead who says, yes, we have an issue, we need to address it, but this is how we address it. And this is how we change the way that we view who is worthy to be on our campus. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Dr. Baker, would you like to add some input to this as well?
Sure. And I'm going to kind of go off on a small tangent in regards to tribal colleges, because tribal colleges are incredibly progressive as far as representation with Indigenous faculty, of course, because that's where we're based from. And even our leadership is really incredibly progressive when you think about it. We have over 30% of presidents in tribal colleges across the United States are female Indigenous, and that's astonishing. That's a crazy high number, and that's way higher than our colleagues in the mainstream institutions. And it's weird because I was just going through these statistics. I was just reading a paper, and I saw myself. It's weird when you can see yourself pop up in a statistic, because one of the things that said on there was only one of these presidents has a background in STEM. And I didn't realize that could be a statistic, but I was a statistic then. And I was like, that's me. And it was cool. And I gave it to my mom even. I was like, hey, look what your daughter did. So, but I digress. As far as I have a vested in having more representation by Indigenous people, because I need those people to return to the reservation and work at my college. Other institutions, other tribal colleges need these people to come back and work at our colleges and continue that pathway, crafting that pathway for more people, so that we can be, bringing along our academics, bringing along our instructors, bringing along our faculty. And I think of, in particular, the programs like that, like ACES has, Lighting the Pathway program, and bringing those faculty along. And hopefully at some point they'll be able to return to the reservation, because there is plenty of economic development that needs to happen on the res in Indian country in particular. And I worked with Sarah Echohawk when I was the chair of the board to make that a very particular goal of the board of directors and of ACES overall, to return ACES to Indian country, to make that space for us. It's really going to take a lot of the professionals that are already in existence and the academics that are being established now to go back to Indian country, to go back and to make those pathways, and to make those basically kind of provide the good spaces for folks to come back to, so they feel welcomed. We always talk about a lot about go out, go get your education, but then we don't necessarily do the back end of it, where we're creating these spaces for them to return to, these welcoming spaces, or the work for them to do. And that's a crucial part. And that's exactly what it is that I have, it behooves me to do that. I have to create those spaces, and I have to make it inviting for them, and also be able to pay them, to write the grants, get the funding. And that's a lot of my job, is doing the hustling for the money. So that's what I do, and that's what a lot of my colleagues do. So I think that's on me as professionals, and I would, you know, ask other professionals to do the same thing. I've had several of these conversations with a lot of my colleagues and friends who are on the professional side of things now, and making those spaces for people. So it's going to take an entire network, and it's going to take the building of a scaffold, which we have a really good start on, and just continuing that work.
Awesome. Great answers, both of you. So what are your best tips for success for Indigenous students who want to have an academic career someday? Dr. Milligan-Myhre, do you want to go first?
One of the biggest mistakes that I made in grad school was trying to be, it was a great mistake. It was also the best thing I did, was to get really involved in ACES. And the reason I got really involved in ACES and Wunkshik, and they were the two biggest Native student groups, not the biggest, because I think our Native Law Student Association was bigger. But they were two of the bigger Native student organizations on campus. The reason it was great was because I didn't have that as an undergrad, and I suffered as an undergrad in part because I didn't recognize that I belonged there. UW-Madison has 40,000 students, 250 students at the time were Native, which meant that we were a tiny portion. And I always felt isolated. I felt otherwise, or othered, right? I felt like people didn't see me as an equal. And that was in part because of how I looked and where I came from. So what I would say to students is, you know, find your student groups, get involved, but don't get too involved. I got too involved. I spent so much time with ACES and organizing and protesting with Wunkshik and, you know, doing all the things you do when you're involved in a Native student group. And my research suffered because of that. I also had a kid and got married. But it took me, in grad school, it took me 7 years to get done, in part because I was so involved with ACES and trying to make sure that it was successful and making sure that my cohorts, my friends, had the support they needed. I did something similar as a postdoc and as a faculty member. Like I just get so over involved with trying to improve campuses for Native people because I'm here, right? And I have this voice and I want to use it and I want to make this campus more welcoming for Native students. And that's an important role. But if my research suffers because of that, if I don't get tenured, I can't be a permanent person on this campus. If I can't reach my research goals and get my grants and get my publications and everything that, you know, do excellent teaching, all the things that I'm measured by when it comes time to become, get to the next step in being an associate professor and then a full professor, I'm not going to be here for my students. You know, I'll have a really short tenure. I'll have a really short time on this campus and I won't be able to make the big changes that I want to. So for Native students, I feel like we end up getting 2 degrees. The first is in whatever research that we're doing. The second is in how to be a Native on campus. I know all the stats. Ask me about how many Native students are on UAA's campus versus University of Wisconsin versus Oregon versus, you know, I know all the stats. I know what the population variation is in each of these different states and how it's changed over time. And like, I know all of this stuff about the Native community because I researched it. That shouldn't just be on me. That should also be on the other people on this campus, especially for primarily white institutions. I am so envious of Dr. Baker for being on a campus where there are more people who can know these stats, who can share this burden. And I say a burden in part because it takes time away from the other things that I want to do, but it's also something that I find a lot of joy in. I love working with other Native faculty, staff, and students to increase the number of students on our campus. It's finding that balance. So my biggest piece of advice for students, 2 of them, one is you have a place on this campus, you deserve to be here. And number 2 is make sure that you're balancing that outreach that you're going to do, that work that you want to do, and that fills your heart. Make sure you're balancing that with your academic schoolwork.
Very good advice. And I think a lot of our Indigenous students were probably shaking their heads, even though they're off cam right now. But yeah, Dr. Baker, what are your tips for future academics who are Indigenous?
Oh my gosh. I think the number one tip is go to class. And I'm speaking as an administrator, as a president of college, is just go to class, please. and I can say that basically, for my students, I can even say that as an auntie. You know, it's just like, hey, I saw you at Family Dollar, but I didn't see you in class. So, you know, things like that, you know, and I think they kind of duck me sometimes. But it's just like, I completely agree with what Dr. Milligan-Myhre was talking about in regards to prioritization of your goals. And, you know, goal setting and talking yourself through this stuff and really kind of getting it down into a list and seeing what your priorities are and what's most pressing for you. That's definitely a way to get through and to help you to really focus your energy on what needs to get done. Because I was similar, I was the same. But the fact is that because there's so few Indigenous people, we kind of get pulled on those things quite often. And you know what? There's always going to be those opportunities. There's always going to be, you know, that social justice work, that other type of work. It's always going to be there. And honestly, you can do better in taking up that mantle if you have the letters behind your name. If you complete what it is that you're there to do for yourself. And then for better or for worse, this Western system recognizes those letters behind your name. And really, it's just a matter of kind of, you know, just cracking down and, hey, I've got to do this. I can't necessarily take on this much more. Definitely to the degree that you are able to handle, working in those networks is incredibly helpful and supportive, and it can connect you to opportunities, funding, even, you know, scholarships and all that type of thing. But after a time, there comes a point where you have to kind of prioritize and say, hey, I've got to back away from this. I have to finish my thesis. I have to write a dissertation or do my research or whatever, you know. So prioritization and time management and recognizing your energy, how you use your energy, where you draw it from, and where it needs to go. That's just knowing yourself really is very, very helpful in getting you through, and especially in an academic career where it can be incredibly taxing on your energy and sapping when you have 20 different demands on your time. So those demands will still be there. They will still be there. So, you know, work on yourself first.
Okay, so let's get to some of our community questions. We have a lot here, so let's try to get through some of them. The first question is, could Professor Milligan-Myhre explain more on what the focus of her current research is with her students?
Yeah, so I study microbes in the gut and how they stimulate development and of the host. And I use this fish called three-spined stickleback that's found throughout the Northern Hemisphere. It's been evolving in different bodies of water. So there are all these populations all over the place, including Alaska, which is why I got really invested in this model system. And they've been evolving different relationship with their microbes. So my students work on a few different types of things. One is how microbes interact with each other within the host, and then how they interact with the hosts themselves. Another thing that they work on is how the host selects for different microbes. And then another one is what happens when you disrupt that microbial community. What happens to the development of the host, and does that vary from one population to the other? We try to focus on ecotoxins that are important for Native communities. So we've looked at perchlorate, which is a contaminant found on military bases that have been shut down, which is a huge concern in Alaska because we've had a lot of military bases there. We've also focused on crude oil, which we've had major oil spills in Alaska that have threatened our ecosystems. And another one is antibiotics, because as we have more people coming into areas that were not as populated before, we're seeing an increase in antibiotics in our waters, and that can change the microbes that are there, and that can affect the development of the host, which can affect the evolution of that host, which can affect the ability of that animal to be available for birds and bigger animals that are preying on it. And so all of this is kind of feeding into this complex system of the ecosystem, the host, and the microbes.
Really interesting work. So I think this question is for Dr. Baker. You mentioned the bias of being Indigenous at a PWI. Can you comment on the bias of being educated by a PWI and returning back to the Indigenous community? I have several colleagues who face a bit of backlash coming back after leaving.
That's me, testify. That's absolutely me. And I completely understand the issue that's at hand, and I've experienced it. And sometimes those barbs that you have to deal with. I worked at University of North Dakota for a number of years before returning back to the reservation. And honestly, I had a lot of kind of headaches and work issues and things like that at UND. But when I came home, those things kind of hit really hard because it felt more personal, because these are me people. This is what they told me to do. They told me to leave and then come home and you know, help your people, return to help your people. But the fact is that as the years have gone on, I've come to the understanding that a lot of that is an impact of what's been instilled in us as far as colonization goes. There's lateral violence there. There's lateral oppression. There's internalized oppression that exists here. And therefore, that's going to manifest itself in an oppression of somebody who has gone out and gotten those degrees and things like that. And honestly, that too is what I'm fighting by coming back here. And one of the things that I use to help me kind of maintain my energy when something like that happens to me is the knowledge that I'm from here. These are my people. My last name is Baker. My mother is Cerise. It's like once I tell myself who it is that I'm doing this for, and it's not necessarily just me, it's for my children, it's for my children's children, it's for my ancestors, it's for everybody and everything, this entire body of knowledge, and how valuable that is and what a gift that is. It makes it a lot easier to stay in place and just kind of fight back, push back. I'm not here necessarily just for my own professional you know, wherewithal or to build my name or anything by any means. It's much, much larger than that. It is so much bigger than just me. One small woman who is one small part of this tribe is so much bigger than that. And once I realize that, then I'm able to kind of, I'm all right. You know, I'm all right. I've grown a thick skin over the years and things like that. And I really want to make it a place where people don't have to experience that anymore. And I've been able to pull back some of my own colleagues, my own classmates and stuff like that. Now they're teaching at our institution and they're working on that same exact thing, pushing back on that lateral oppression and you know, understanding that it's a purpose much bigger than us. So that's helpful. That's how I kind of fight back against that.
Great answer. Okay, so we have another question. This one's from Faith. The question is, where does a decolonial university exist? Is it through restructuring curriculum in Western institutions? Is it tribal universities, or is it something entirely new? And whoever wants to answer that one, feel free to.
I think I'm getting a lip point now too, so. Boy, honestly, if I'm being completely honest, which I always want to do with students, the decolonial university exists at the feet of our elders. It exists in ceremony. It exists in the places that are not necessarily brick and mortar buildings. That is not where I garnered my knowledge of my identity. And that's where it's completely decolonial. However, that being said, we exist within these systems. Therefore, we function with those tools and that knowledge. And I think complete deconstruction of that would probably be necessary to have a completely decolonial institution or university or teaching system or learning system. But here we are. This is our day-to-day. This is what we exist in, and this is what we have to deal with. And Indians, Native people are very good at responding to what's right in front of them. So therefore, I've told students this before, and I always wonder if it's good wording or not. But when I left to go get my education, I left and I went and I got the weapons of my enemy, and that's what I use. That's what I use in my day-to-day to do the job that I came here to do. And maybe someday far off in the future, when I'm gone, we'll be at the feet of our elders again. I know that's where I do my best learning. And until that happens, I'm gonna just keep doing whatever I have to do to indigenize these spaces as much as possible.
Awesome. Dr. Milligan-Myhre, would you like to take a question from Torsten? The question is, there are a lot of ways of being Indigenous, along with the broader ways of reconciling what you've talked about. Are there also subtleties in how people from different Indigenous communities work in academia?
So there's so many different ways to be Indigenous. One of the things that I think about a lot is the fact that to get this Bachelor's of Science and the PhD and the postdoc, those were all in primarily white institutions in the lower 48, and I'm from Alaska. So I spent 20 years not being a part of my community. That means that I lost most of my language. I wasn't practicing my dances. I had nobody to speak Inupiaq with. When I had my first kid, I had to email my aunt and say, Auntie, how do I do this the Indigenous way, you know, because I didn't have my aunties right there from the time I told them that I was pregnant. I didn't have them right there saying, this is how you prepare. These are what you take care of before you have the baby. This is how you take care of the baby afterwards in the way that we've been doing this for 10,000 years. So even within one person, the way to be Indigenous changes over time. You know, I was raised with my Anna giving me seal oil and muktuk, and then went off to the lower 48 and was in primarily white places for 20 years, and then went back to Alaska where I relearned some Inupiaq and dances and reconnected, and then moved back down to the lower 48 where again, I don't have, you know, nobody's bringing me caribou in the lower 48, you know. I think that it doesn't really vary from, it does vary from one group to the next. There are over 500 different tribes, over 560 different tribes. And so there's over 560 different ways to be Indigenous in different tribes. And then within each of those tribes, there's different ways of being Indigenous. So I think it becomes really important to remember that being Indigenous means many different things. Making sure that you know what it means for you is important. For a long time, I thought being Indigenous meant that I had to go back home and learn how to take care of a seal when my dad brought it home or whatnot. You know, I had all these ideas in my head about what it meant to be Indigenous, and I wasn't being Indigenous enough. It turns out I was being Indigenous just by being me and just bringing my worldview to my academic spaces. So there's many different ways of being Indigenous. Make sure you know which way is working best for you, and make sure that you're not looking down on other people who stayed back home and learned different things, different ways to be Indigenous than you did. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've had to overcome. You know, we were talking earlier about bringing your education back home. One of the biggest obstacles that I face is people thinking that I'm all uppity now that I have this degree, and then me having to say, look, because I went away for so long, I missed out on doing all these things that you know how to do, and you hold all this knowledge that I don't. I am not uppity. I think you have an important role here in our community, and that both of our roles are important, and we can coexist and we can help each other. So I think there's lots of different ways of being Indigenous. There's lots of different ways of making sure that people back home see that you're not less Indigenous because you went away for so long.
That's an excellent response. So I think we have time for one more question. This is an anonymous question. It is, how do you manage to hold academia as a space of healing and empowering while combating with imposter syndrome and internalized colonized mentality? Anyone want to give a 60-second response to that one?
I think by existing. The fact that Kat and I exist, you know, and there's more of us. There's so many of us, and you guys are them too. That it's like, it's I think back to the fact that, and I love what Kat was talking about in regards to, you know, existing the way that you are being Indigenous. You know, I love that because it's a expression of the, not just the history and the tradition of our people, but also our future. And the fact that we are defining and redefining what it is to be Indigenous every single day, every day. You just you're being you, and we're not just traditional. We're not monoliths. We are not antiquities. We are innovation is traditional. Adaptation is traditional. You know, evolution is traditional for our people. We adapted to what was in front of us. And so the iteration of Indigenous that you are right now is absolutely valid. And we really have to be strong in our personal identities and developing that, and be so incredibly strong that these external barbs, whether it's the bullets in the front or the arrows in the back, you're going to be protected and you're going to know that you're okay.
That's a wonderful, wonderful response. Do either of you have any final thoughts to offer our guests that we haven't been able to get to today?
You know, for students who are at primarily white institutions, there are so many natives on Twitter. Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and whatever it is. It's really hard to build a community when there's not a community there. So build your community the best way that you can. And if you have to go outside to do it. When you get your education, somebody was asking about, you know, how do we make sure that we do something that we can bring back? I didn't know how to bring what I had back until I was able to go back home and find out what people needed. I was trying to fit what I had learned into them, and instead of asking them what they needed from me and how my education now could help them. So when you're a student and you're trying to figure out, how do I make this, how do I do this for my people back home? Part of that is going back home and saying, hey, what do you need from me? And talking to your elders and listening. You know, we in academia, we're taught to talk. We're taught to give 45-minute seminars where we're the only ones talking, and we sometimes forget how to listen. So go back home, listen, and figure out what it is that they need from you.
Awesome. Dr. Baker, do you have any final thoughts in the last couple of minutes of our event here?
I guess I want to tell students to trust themselves and to listen to their internal voice, especially when something from the external is coming around and saying that what they know of themselves is causing them self-doubt, or making them think that what they know is invalid, what they've been taught by other people is invalid. That's absolutely not true. Please remember that our bodies of knowledge have been here for millennia, thousands of years. And that's flowing in your blood, that's flowing in your veins. And our oral histories are just as valid, if not more so, because this was protected knowledge, and it was something that we had to hold sacred and protect, shield from the outside, because it was so powerful and so threatening that they wanted to take it away from us. A lot of this stuff, all of this knowledge and stuff like that, it's sacred, and so are you, and you're the vessel that's being carried in. And I also want people to wash their hands and mask up, and be safe, so that we can all be around and take care of each other.
Thank you both very, very much. Mado, that's how we say it in Muscogee. Mado, for coming today. Thank you for your time and for helping us learn more about how to indigenize academia and learn more about your great work in university and college communities. Thank you everyone for attending today. We appreciate your time. Our next event will occur in January. We have not yet submitted the date for that one, but stay tuned. Since you registered for today's event, you will be sent an email notification once we get that one scheduled. And our next event will focus on Indigenous scientists who work with the United States government. So we hope we can see you again at our next event, and we wish everyone a wonderful evening. And thank you again to Dr. Baker and Dr. Milligan-Myhre for your wonderful time today. Bye, guys.